we have configured how to authenticate users connecting to the firewall. There is one more thing that we need to do for management access, and that is filtering and disallowing traffic from specific IP addresses for each protocol. If we look at what I have already done in this configuration, I look at the command that starts with SSH. This command defines how incoming SSH management traffic should be handled in the firewall. This command states which devices or which source IPs are allowed to SSH to the firewall. In this case, I allow anyone on the outside interface coming from the source IP subnet of 10.192.168/24 to connect to the firewall. By default, no one is allowed access to the firewall with the SSH. That means that we need to put some IP addresses in here to allow anyone to connect with SSH, and you need to select wisely who should be allowed access. I do not recommend you to allow too much IP addresses from the outside to connect to the firewall for security purposes. In lab environments, it's okay, but in production environments, I recommend you to use VPN or something else to do management access from the inside or in an encrypted way. But in this case, I allow myself coming from this subnet on the outside to connect with SSH to the firewall. The same goes with HTTP. That means that's the same subnet on the outside that is allowed to connect with ASDM. If I look at Telnet, I do not have anyone allowed access with Telnet here to the firewall. If I want to do that, I can add it. I can do Telnet and IP address. And instead of IP addresses, if I want anyone, no matter of source IP, to connect to the firewall, I can use 0000 with the mask 0000, and the interface in this case I want to use is inside. This command tells the firewall that anyone connecting with Telnet, no matter of source IP, as long as they come from any IP addresses inside of the firewall, they will be allowed to connect with Telnet. They still need to be authenticated, but if they are coming from the outside, for example, which is not specified here, they will not be able to even connect. The firewall will drop the SYN packet and will not respond to it. I do not want to use Telnet here. This, of course, cannot be used for serial for console because console is the physical console port. For SSH, there is one more thing to remember. Since it's encrypted, you need to use encryption keys. Those needs to be created. I've already created them here, but the command to create encryption keys is crypto key, generate, RSA, modulus, and the size of the key in bits. I recommend you to always use a key size larger than or at least 1024 bits, because that's the minimum key size that is supported by SSH version 2, and that's more secure. By making a key size at least 1024 bit large, you will disable anyone using SSH version 1 to connect to the firewall, which is good for security purposes. In this case, I already created them, so I do not want to replace them. But in a normal initial configuration of a firewall, you need to create those keys, otherwise SSH will not work. Also for SSH, there is a command SSH timeout that by default is 5 minutes. You can raise it to more than that, or you can lower it as well. The default idle timeout of 5 minutes, it's a bit too low, and it's frustrating because after 5 minutes of idle in the terminal window, you will be thrown out of the session. I normally raise that to the maximum available of 60 minutes, which means that I can use and run the terminal window untouched and not being used for 60 minutes without being thrown out. So we have our commands to define who should be allowed access to the firewall. And we need to specify the interface here as well. If we want anyone, we enter 0000. We also have the command to tell how to authenticate the user, that we should allow in this case SSH access that is authenticated using the local username and password database. If we look at that, show run username, we will see that we have only one user created here. That's the user CISCO, and the password in this case is encrypted, so we cannot read it, but it is in this case CISCO with the small letters as well as password. We log in with username CISCO, password CISCO. The privilege 15 back here means that user has full privileges for all security levels. I recommend you to do that unless you need to limit who should be allowed to do something. In most cases, when you enter users in the local database, you want those users to have full access to the firewall, and then you add privilege 15. If you omit and skip this optional privilege 15 in the end of the configuration line, if I configure username Cisco, password Cisco, and omit and skip the privilege 15, in this case here, I will get problem in some cases where I need full access to the firewall. Always add privilege 15 on the username configuration of the local username and database. In larger implementations, I recommend you to use Radius or TACACS to move the user database out of the local firewall to an external database, because you can use a Active Directory, for example, or LDAP as a source for usernames and password. That means that the user will have the same password as you do when they log into their computer. So this is how you configure and limit and enable management access for the firewall when it comes to HTTP, ASDM, SSH, which is encrypted, Telnet, which is unencrypted, and Serial Console, which is the console port.